The night was a predator, and I was its perennial prey. The darkness brought them out, the groaning, shambling dead, their silhouettes barely discernible against the ruined cityscape. My name is Alex, and this is my world now, a nocturnal nightmare that never seems to end. I huddled in the shadows of an abandoned apartment complex, my breath shallow, trying not to make a sound. The air was thick with the stench of decay. I could hear them outside, the scraping of their limbs against the cracked pavement, the guttural hunger in their throaty moans. They were close, too close for comfort, but I had become adept at this deadly game of hide and seek. My nightly rituals were methodical: barricade the doors, check my supplies, and ensure my escape routes were clear. I had long since learned that hope was a luxury I couldn't afford, but routine was a lifeline. It was what kept me human, kept me sane, in a world overrun by the undead. I peeked through a gap in the boarded-up window, my gaze scanning for movement. They were there, as always, a relentless sea of death, their eyes hollow, their bodies a grotesque mockery of their former selves. I had seen them tear people apart, had heard the screams that didn't end until they were abruptly cut off. Those images haunted me, a brutal reminder of what awaited me if I ever slipped up. The night wore on, a symphony of horror playing outside my fragile sanctuary. I clutched my makeshift weapon, a fire axe with a handle worn smooth from use. It had saved my life more times than I cared to count, its blade stained with the evidence of my will to survive. As the hours passed, a sense of unease settled over me. They were getting agitated, more so than usual. A cacophony of snarls and crashes echoed through the night. They were searching for something, for someone. I prayed to a god I no longer believed in that it wasn't me. Then, without warning, the door buckled under a forceful blow. I stood up, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Another hit, and the wood splintered, a grotesque hand reaching through the opening. The siege had begun. I swung my axe with precision, severing the limb that dared to breach my haven. But it was just the start. They came at me like a wave, each one falling only to be replaced by another. I fought with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed, each strike a desperate plea for life. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the world, I found my opening. I hurled a Molotov cocktail into the crowd, the flames illuminating their ravenous faces. And then I ran as if the very fires of hell were on my heels. The chapter closes with me escaping into the breaking day, the city a labyrinth of horror, and me, a lone survivor, clinging to the hope of another day alive in this brutal new world. The dawn's light was a daily rebirth, a brief respite from the nocturnal terrors. I'm Alex, and by day, I become a hunter in a world that has turned against itself. The sun's rays, though weak, were a beacon of hope in the desolate streets of what was once a bustling city. I ventured out from my temporary shelter, a backpack slung over my shoulder, filled with the essentials, water, food, and the ever-dwindling medical supplies. My search wasn't just for sustenance but for answers. Somewhere out there was a cure, a way to reverse this nightmare. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. The city was eerily silent in the daylight, the chaos of the night replaced by a haunting stillness. I made my way to an abandoned CDC outpost I had stumbled upon days earlier. The place was ransacked, papers strewn about, vials shattered. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was order, files labeled, research documented. Someone had been working on a cure. I scoured the documents, my eyes scanning for anything that could lead to an antidote. And then, I found it, a series of notes detailing a potential vaccine, something that could possibly reverse the effects of the virus. My heart raced. This was it, the glimmer of hope in an endless sea of despair. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made you believe in the possibility of a future, a life beyond survival. I pocketed the notes, a map of sorts to my salvation. I was about to leave when a faint sound caught my attention, a crackling noise, a voice over a radio. The broadcast was looped, a message repeating over and over: to any survivors, there is a safe haven. Coordinates to follow. You are not alone. The voice was calm, almost serene amidst the backdrop of chaos. I scribbled down the coordinates, my mission now twofold: find the safe haven and develop the antidote. The day was waning, and I knew I had to make it back before the dead began their nightly hunt. I packed the radio, the notes, and whatever supplies I could carry. The journey back was a race against time, the sun dipping lower with every step I took. As I reached my shelter, the first howls of the night began, a grim reminder that the world now belonged to the dead. But in my hands, I held the key to taking it back. I settled in, the radio's static a whisper of hope, the notes my blueprint for a cure. The morning light crept in, a silent witness to the world's decay. I had survived another night, another dance with death. My name is Alex, and I might be the last hope for a cure. Today, I was not just a scavenger, I was a seeker of the living, a rarity in this apocalypse. I followed the coordinates, the radio's promise of a safe haven etched in my mind. The city was a graveyard of memories, each corner a reminder of the life that once thrived here. I moved cautiously, avoiding the roaming dead, a predator among predators. As I turned down an alley, a figure caught my eye, a person, alive, moving with purpose. I tensed, ready for confrontation. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice a stranger to my own ears. The figure stopped, turning slowly. "I'm Jamie," came the reply, a voice tinged with relief and exhaustion. Jamie stepped into the light, hands raised in peace. "I've been following your messages, the breadcrumbs you left." I lowered my guard slightly. Jamie's eyes were a mirror of my own, haunted by loss and survival. The group I was with. They didn't make it, Jamie confessed, the weight of the words heavy with grief. We shared our stories, two souls amidst the ruins. Jamie spoke of the group's struggle, the relentless attacks, and the cruel fate that befell them. I listened, my heart aching for the companionship I had longed for. "We need to stick together," I said, the decision as much for my sanity as for our survival. "There's a safe haven. I have coordinates." Jamie nodded, a silent agreement forged. We set out together, an alliance in the face of oblivion. The day was spent dodging shadows and the undead, our conversations a mix of strategy and shared memories. As the sun began to set, we found an abandoned store to bunker down. The night was upon us, and with it, the horrors that lurked. We fortified our shelter, setting traps and preparing for the siege. The dead came, as they always did, a wave of rot and rage. Jamie and I fought back to back, a brutal ballet of survival. The night was long, the attacks relentless, but we endured. As dawn broke, we emerged, battered but alive. Our bond had been forged in blood and brutality. We were no longer just survivors, we were warriors, comrades in a war against the undead. The silence in the abandoned emergency broadcast center was suffocating. As I stepped over shattered glass and passed by walls lined with peeling posters of emergency numbers and protocols, the gravity of our situation settled in my chest like concrete. Jamie trailed behind me, their breaths shallow and quick, a stark reminder that we were both running on fumes, emotionally and physically. We had come here seeking answers, or at least some semblance of hope. The place was a tomb, a mausoleum of the world that once was. The monitors, once aglow with warnings and updates, were dark now, and the only sound was the occasional skitter of debris tumbling across the floor, disturbed by our intruding presence. I approached a desk, its surface littered with papers that held the panic of the past. Among the chaos, a binder caught my eye, its label worn but legible, Project Resurgence. My hands trembled as I flipped it open, the pages yellowed with age and stained with coffee rings that told of long nights and desperate research. The notes were technical, filled with terms that danced just beyond my full understanding, but the gist was horrifyingly clear. The virus wasn't an act of nature, it was man-made, an experiment gone horrifically wrong. And it had evolved, outpacing the scientists' predictions and their control. My eyes scanned the pages until they landed on a section that made my heart stop, the antidote. It was there, a biochemical formula that looked more like a cryptic puzzle. But the key to it all was something irreplaceable, something unique, the blood of an immune. My blood. Jamie leaned over my shoulder, their voice a whisper, "Is that?" "Yeah," I managed to choke out, "it's me. I'm the cure." The weight of that revelation was paralyzing. I was no longer just a survivor, I was the linchpin in the human race's chance at a comeback. But at what cost? The notes didn't detail the process, but I knew it wouldn't be as simple as drawing a pint and walking away. This was bigger than me, bigger than any one person. We spent the rest of the day poring over the notes, piecing together the history of the outbreak. It was a tale of ambition and hubris, of humanity's reach exceeding its grasp. And now, here we were, standing in the ruins of those grand plans, with the power to rewrite the ending. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood, reality came crashing back. The safe haven we'd heard about was a ghost story, a whisper on the wind. Our hope had to be mobile, it had to be us. Jamie and I packed up the most crucial documents, the formula for the antidote etched into our minds. We were about to step out into the dying light when a noise froze us in our tracks, the unmistakable groan of the undead. They were close, too close. "We need to go, now," Jamie said, urgency lacing their words. I nodded, tucking the binder under my arm. The truth was heavy in my hands, but it was nothing compared to the decision that lay ahead. Could I become the sacrifice the world needed? Could I let Jamie, the only person I had left, witness that end? We left the broadcast center with the echoes of the dead in our ears, the open-ended question of our fate hanging between us. The night was falling, and with it, the curtain was rising on the final act of this horror show. The sky bled crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon, its fading light a metaphor for the hope that was quickly diminishing. Jamie and I stood back to back, the weight of the impending doom pressing down on us. The research notes, tucked securely in Jamie's bag, were our only ticket to a future, but the horde advancing towards our makeshift barricade didn't care about the future. The first of the undead slammed into the barrier with a sickening thud, its grotesque face a mask of hunger and decay. More followed, a relentless tide of death that sought to sweep us away. I gripped my makeshift weapon, a fire axe that had seen better days, and braced myself. "This is it, Jamie," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. "Remember, no matter what happens, you run. Get those notes to someone who can use them." Jamie's hand found mine, a fleeting touch that spoke volumes. "I won't leave you," they said, a fierce determination in their tone. "You have too," I insisted, pulling away to face the onslaught. "One of us has to make it out, and it's not going to be me." The barrier gave way with a crash, and the undead poured through like floodwaters. We fought with the desperation of the damned, each blow a prayer for just a few more seconds of life. The zombies were relentless, and for every one we took down, 2 more took its place. It was during that chaos, the brutal dance of death, that I made my decision. I could see the path to the secret exit we had found earlier, a narrow chance at escape. I could also see that we wouldn't both make it. "Go!" I yelled at Jamie, shoving them towards the exit. "Now!" They hesitated, their eyes wide with horror, but the survival instinct won out. Clutching the bag to their chest, Jamie ran. I turned back to the horde, the fire axe rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. Each strike was a goodbye, each scream of the undead a farewell to the world I'd known. The zombies crowded in, their numbers too great, their hunger too fierce. I fought until my arms ached and my breath came in ragged gasps. And when they finally overcame me, when their teeth sank into flesh and their hands pulled me down, my last thought was of Jamie, running towards hope. The darkness closed in, but it wasn't the end. Not for Jamie. Not for humanity. Because as long as those notes existed, as long as Jamie lived to deliver them, there was a chance for a cure, a chance for a future. And me? I was just a memory, a sacrifice in the name of that future. My story was over, but the fight for humanity's survival was just beginning. The question of whether Jamie made it, whether the cure was found, I'd never know. But as the world faded to black, I hoped. The end? No, it was just another beginning. I always believed science was our light in the darkness, a beacon of hope against the ills of the world. That belief shattered the night our cure became a curse. My name is Dr. Eli Walker, and I was part of the team that doomed humanity. It was supposed to be a breakthrough, a cure for diseases that ravaged the mind. We toiled in the bowels of the earth, in a lab so deep and isolated it felt like another world. I remember the sterile smell, the hum of the equipment, the way my colleagues' eyes lit up with each small victory. We were on the brink of something great. But greatness often skirts the precipice of disaster. It happened in an instant. A vial slipped from a trembling hand, shattering against the cold floor. The virus, our miracle, mutated by ambition and hubris, was free. The air hissed as the containment alarms blared, a banshee wail that heralded the end. I saw it take them, one by one. My friends, my comrades in arms against disease, they changed before my eyes. Their humanity drained away as the virus filled them with a ravenous hunger. They became grotesque parodies of themselves, their faces contorting, their bodies twisting into something monstrous. The screams still echo in my mind. I can hear the wet tear of flesh, the snap of bone, the gurgles of the dying as they rose again, hungry for the living. I ran, not brave, not heroic, just scared. I found refuge in a decontamination chamber, sealing the door against the nightmare. I sat there, the only sound my ragged breaths and the thump of my heart pounding a relentless rhythm of terror. The chamber was a glass coffin, offering a view of the lab now overrun with the dead. I watched them, my colleagues, as they shuffled aimlessly, their eyes void of the light of reason. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time loses meaning when you're staring at the end of everything you know. I survived on rationed sips of water and the stale air that tasted of chemicals and fear. The power flickered, the emergency lights casting the lab in a red glow, like the very fires of hell had risen to claim us. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. The facility was on lockdown, but there had to be a way out. There was a protocol for everything, even the apocalypse, it seemed. I had to warn the world, to tell them of the horror we had unleashed. When the silence finally came, it was more terrifying than the chaos. The dead had moved on, searching for new prey. I stepped out of the chamber, armed with nothing but a scalpel and the weight of guilt. The lab journal in my pocket was a testament to our folly, the pages filled with equations and formulas that now spelled doom. I moved through the lab, a mausoleum of science and ambition. The bodies of my friends lay where they had fallen, some still, others not. I avoided looking at their faces, at the carnage we had wrought. I couldn't bear it. The path to the surface was a descent into madness. But I was determined to climb out of this hell we had dug ourselves into. I had to survive, to carry the burden of our sins to the world above. And so, I began to climb, leaving behind the depths of hunger that we had awakened. The decontamination chamber's hiss was a requiem for the dead as I stepped out, the scalpel in my hand cold and far too small. The lab journal pressed against my chest, a shield of paper and ink against the nightmare. I was no soldier, my battlefield had been petri dishes and microscopes, not this labyrinth of death. The facility was a maze, its once pristine corridors now a gallery of horrors. Blood smeared the walls, handprints dragged down to the floor where the fallen lay. I stepped over bodies, some in lab coats like mine, others in the black garb of security. Their vacant eyes stared at nothing, their last moments a silent scream for mercy. I moved with caution, the scalpel a pitiful weapon against the transformed. They were my colleagues, my friends, now just shells driven by a hunger that knew no reason. I avoided them when I could, hid when I couldn't, and fought when I was forced. Each confrontation left me shaking, the scalpel slick in my sweaty grip. The deeper I went, the clearer the military's hand in this became. I found rooms I never knew existed, sealed off from the main lab, with warnings of biohazard and danger. In one, monitors still flickered, showing maps with zones marked in red, and files scattered on the floor spoke of Project Nemesis. The virus wasn't just a cure gone wrong, it was a weapon that had backfired. I realized then that the world needed to know, not just for the sake of the truth but for survival. The military would cover this up, bury it under layers of concrete and lies. But I had the lab journal, evidence of what had been done here. If I could reach the surface, find someone to listen. The thought was a spark in the darkness, propelling me forward. I clung to it as I navigated through the facility, using the emergency signs as a guide to the surface. The signs pointed to a freight elevator, a potential way out. But when I arrived, the doors were dented from the inside. Something big had tried to get out, or something had kept it in. I took the stairs instead, the climb a physical manifestation of my desperation. Each floor brought new terrors, new decisions I never thought I'd face. I was a scientist, not a killer. But with each life I took back from the virus, each colleague I put down, I lost a piece of myself. When I finally reached the top, the door to the surface was barricaded, the other side a cacophony of growls and scratches. They were there, waiting in the darkness. I could see the exit sign, a green beacon in the gloom, so close yet impossibly far. I had to make a choice. I could try to break through, to face the horde and hope against hope I'd make it. Or I could look for another way, maybe a ventilation shaft or a service tunnel. The lab journal felt heavy in my pocket, its pages a burden of responsibility. I chose the path of caution, retracing my steps to find another route. The decision was a delay, a detour in the race against time. But I was still alive, still moving. And as long as I was moving, there was hope. Hope, that was what drove me through the darkness, what kept my legs moving when all I wanted to do was collapse. Hope, and the need to tell the world of the abyss we had opened. Because down here, in the bowels of the earth, we had awakened something that should have remained a secret, a terror that should have stayed hidden in the shadows. And now, it was up to me to warn the world, to bring the truth into the light. The silence of the underground was shattered by the echo of boots on metal, a rhythm of impending doom. I was crouched in the darkness of a utility closet, the lab journal pressed against my chest like a talisman, when they came. The military. Their voices were muffled through the door, but I could hear the authority, the cold precision that came with training. I should have felt relief, but instead, a spike of fear drove through me. They weren't here to rescue, they were here to contain. I listened, the scalpel in my hand slick with more than just my sweat now. They spoke of cleansing and containment, words that left no room for survivors. I waited until their footsteps faded before I dared to emerge. My disguise was a dead soldier's uniform, the bloodstains and tears a grim testament to its previous owner. I was no longer Dr. Eli Walker, virologist. I was now a faceless grunt, another cog in a machine that I knew was broken. Joining the unit was like stepping into a different world. They moved with a purpose I envied, their guns a sure answer to the moans and growls that filled the corridors. I followed, my role silent, my presence barely acknowledged. We were a force of retribution, a moving wall of death for the undead that now roamed the halls. The brutality was a language I learned quickly. Hesitation meant death, and mercy was a bullet. I watched them clear rooms, their efficiency a horror show that left my stomach churning. But among the violence, I saw necessity, the hard choices of survival in a world gone mad. We reached the control room, its monitor still flickering with life. The screen showed the spread, the infection reaching beyond the lab's confines. The virus was loose in the world, and the weight of that knowledge was a punch to the gut. We were too late. The outbreak was no longer just our hell, it was everyone's. The chapter closed with us standing in that room, the truth a heavy shroud. The unit's commander spoke of new orders, of moving out. I knew then that my journey wasn't over. The fight was just beginning, and the echoes of the damned were a chorus that would follow us to the surface and beyond. The days blurred into a relentless stream of close calls and carnage. I was no longer just surviving, I was existing in a state of constant motion, my every action synced with the unit's singular goal, to fight through the swarming hordes of what used to be people. Harper was a constant at my side, their rifle an extension of their will to survive. We didn't talk much about the past, it was too painful, too raw. Instead, we shared the present, the small victories that came with each cleared room, each narrow escape. In this hell, Harper's steady presence was the closest thing to solace I could find. We were in the bowels of the facility when it happened. The plan was simple, reach the service elevators, ascend to the ground level, and evacuate. But simplicity is a luxury that doesn't exist in a zombie-infested labyrinth. The ambush was sudden, a cacophony of groans and the stench of death. They were on us before we could form a defensive line. I fought back-to-back with Harper, our movements a desperate dance of survival. But even as we cut them down, I could see the tide was turning against us. A scream tore through the chaos, Harper's voice, laced with pain and shock. I spun around to see them grappling with one of the creatures, its teeth sunk deep into Harper's arm. My heart stopped, my mind raced. I knew what this meant. With a swift motion, I freed Harper, pulling them behind our shaky barricade. The wound was bad, the virus would be coursing through their veins before we could even attempt an escape. Harper met my gaze, their eyes a mixture of fear and resignation. "Leave me," they rasped, the words a gut punch. "You know what has to be done." I did know. We all knew. There was no coming back from a bite. But leaving Harper wasn't just leaving a soldier, it was leaving the last shred of humanity I had found in this nightmare. The unit was moving, the evacuation a now or never moment. I hesitated, my hand on Harper's shoulder, the weight of the decision anchoring me to the spot. "Go!" Harper shouted, pushing me away. "Warn them. Warn the world." I left Harper there, their pistol in their hand and determination in their eyes. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sound of a single gunshot echoed behind me as I ran, a haunting epilogue to the bond we had formed. Reaching the surface was like breaking through the surface of a dark ocean, gasping for air. But the air I breathed was filled with the sounds of sirens and chaos. The virus had escaped the confines of the lab. The world was now the battleground. I stood there, alone and lost, the lab journal my damning evidence of the military's role in this catastrophe. With shaking hands, I began to record a message, a warning to anyone who might still be listening. The truth had to be known. As I finished, the distant sounds of gunshots and screams punctuated the silence of my own despair. I turned away from the facility, from the memories of those I had left behind, and stepped into the uncertain wilderness. The chapter closed with me, Eli Walker, once a virologist, now a harbinger of truths too terrible to bear. Harper's sacrifice was a weight I would carry into whatever future awaited me, a future overshadowed by the echoes of the damned and the cost of survival. The world above was not as I left it. The sky, once a canvas of blues and oranges, now hung heavy with a shroud of despair. The air was thick with the acrid tang of smoke and the distant clamor of chaos. I stood on the precipice of a reality I no longer recognized, clutching the lab journal like a talisman against the encroaching madness. I had emerged from the underground into a nightmare. The virus, my life's work turned harbinger of doom, had spilled its ravenous wrath upon the unsuspecting world. The military's blockade was in shambles, their efforts to contain the outbreak as effective as a bandage on a severed artery. With Harper's final, echoing gunshots still ringing in my ears, I stumbled through the desolate streets. The city was a mausoleum of what once was, its silence more terrifying than the screams that occasionally pierced the stillness. I was alone, utterly alone, save for the ghosts of my past actions and the weight of Harper's sacrifice. I found a radio station, abandoned and silent, its operators long since fled or fallen. With trembling hands, I powered up the equipment, the static a harsh reminder of the life I had before the world turned to hell. I spoke into the microphone, my voice a lone beacon in the darkness. "This is Dr. Eli Walker," I began, the name tasting foreign on my tongue. "To anyone who can hear me, the outbreak. It's not contained. It's everywhere. The virus, it was a military experiment gone wrong. They thought they could control it. They were wrong." I detailed the symptoms, the means of transmission, the brutal necessity of destroying the brain to put them down. I spoke of the underground lab, of the horrors I had witnessed, and of the military's role in the catastrophe. I didn't know if anyone was listening, but the truth had to be told. As I left the station, the broadcast echoing behind me, I felt the final threads of my old life sever. The virologist, the healer, the dreamer, all were casualties of the virus, just as much as those who had turned. The wilderness beckoned, a vast expanse of uncertainty. I had no destination, no plan beyond survival. The distant sounds of gunshots and screams were a grim symphony, the soundtrack to the new world. I walked away from the city, from the remnants of humanity, into the unknown. The journal remained with me, its pages filled with the science of the virus and the narrative of our downfall. It was a record of mistakes and warnings, a guide for those who might survive to continue the fight. I would guard it with my life, for it was the key to understanding, perhaps to a cure. As night fell, the darkness was complete, a void where the stars once twinkled with indifference to human suffering. I found refuge in a hollowed-out tree, the earth's embrace a cold comfort. I closed my eyes, the day's horrors replaying behind my lids. I awoke to a new world, one where the rules of survival were written by the dead. My journey was far from over, it had only just begun. The gunshots and screams had faded, replaced by the silence of a world holding its breath. I stepped forward, a solitary figure against the dawn of an uncertain day, the last strand of hope in a frayed tapestry of despair. And so, my story ends here, for now. The future is a murky path, unwritten and fraught with peril. But as long as I draw breath, as long as the journal remains in my hands, there is a chance. For in this new world, hope is not a concept, it's a weapon. The world's silent, white canvas was a stark contrast to the chaotic, blood-streaked streets from months prior. The first freeze had come early, catching the undead mid-lurch. They stood, frozen statues in a world gone mad. I, Jordan, walked among them, inspecting these icicles that once hunted us. Shivering, I recalled my days studying climate patterns, never imagining I'd live to see the world's end. But this cold had bought us time. As days turned to weeks, survivors emerged. We formed a camp, using the frozen zombies as barriers, macabre, but effective. Among the fires and makeshift tents, laughter echoed, a sound I hadn't heard in ages. For a moment, we believed we'd reclaimed our world. Yet, every night, as I stared at the clear, starry sky, a dread gnawed at me. Spring was coming. And with it, the thaw. I tried warning the others. "We're safe now," declared Lisa, a former teacher, her eyes full of hope. "They're dead. Properly dead." But I persisted, convincing a few. We started preparations, trenches, barriers, and anything else we could think of. Spring's approach was evident. The once hard ground became slushy. A few zombies showed signs of movement. The day of the first thaw is etched in my memory. The morning sun glinted off the melting snow, creating beautiful, deadly streams. And then, a groan. Followed by another. And another. The camp was in chaos. Those unprepared were caught off guard, but our defenses held strong. The trenches trapped many, and the barriers kept them at bay. It was brutal, seeing friends lost, but our preparations paid off. The thawed zombies were more vicious, more desperate. But they were also slower, their limbs damaged from the freeze. Nightfall saw a sea of the undead, still trying to breach our camp. But as days passed, their numbers dwindled. And we survived. With summer approaching, the world around us changed. Nature reclaimed its space. And with fortified vehicles, we moved to higher ground, to a place we could fortify permanently, a sanctuary. We named our new home Hope, a beacon for all survivors. While the undead still roamed, we had found a way to live again. In this new world, I found my purpose, not as a scientist but as a beacon of hope.